The sun doesn't rise gently over the Nile. It strikes, like a hammer on an anvil, a white-hot blade of light that carves the horizon before the first bird calls. In ancient Egypt, the sun wasn't a distant star. It was Ra, a celestial king who ruled with a fist of fire. By mid-morning, the world begins to dissolve. The horizon blurs into a liquid haze. The air shimmers above the dunes, distorting reality. A ghost of water that hides the true distance. Perspective dies in the glare. By noon, the ground itself radiates heat back at the sky. It is an oven, a vast golden furnace without a door. The sand can reach temperatures of 70 degrees Celsius, enough to blister skin, enough to turn the landscape into a weapon. In Upper Egypt, summer temperatures climb past 45 degrees, sometimes 50 degrees in the dead zones between the limestone cliffs. The air feels heavy, thick, like breathing through a sun-drenched cloth. Every breath is a reminder of the desert's power. Your body loses water before you even feel the sweat. The heat is a silent predator. Stone burns to the touch. Metal would be unthinkable. Shade becomes more than comfort. Shade becomes a biological necessity. Shade becomes survival. And the solution wasn't magic. It was design. Homes that could feel dramatically cooler than the streets outside. Sanctuaries built from the very same earth that burned beneath their feet. Ancient Egypt wasn't just pyramids, gold, and eternal temples. It was heat. Relentless, crushing, absolute desert heat. A force that dictated every law of existence, from the layout of a palace to the schedule of a peasant. The pharaohs didn't just manage people, they managed the sun. And thousands of years ago, before electricity, before fans, before air conditioning, before we learned to fight nature with the hum of machines and the consumption of coal, Egyptian families faced a question that was as urgent as it was simple. How do you build a home that stays cool when the sun never stops? How do you create a sanctuary in a climate that wants to drain your life? The Nile Valley offered a thin, green ribbon of life. The Kemet, the Black Land, lush banks, fertile soil. But beyond those few miles stretched the Desert, the Red Land, dry, exposed, unforgiving, an ocean of heat that never sleeps. Wood was a luxury they didn't have. The few acacia and sycamore trees were for furniture, ships, and gods. Rain was a myth from a different age. A rare event whispered by grandfathers. The sun ruled everything, life, death, and the very architecture of time. The challenge wasn't decorative. It wasn't about aesthetics or vanity. It was existential engineering. In 45-degree heat, a poorly designed shelter isn't just uncomfortable. It's a trap, a vessel for dehydration, a catalyst for heat stroke, a space where the mind slows and the heart strains. The environment was a predator that never tired, and the house was the only armor. So instead of fighting the sun, the Egyptians did something smarter. They negotiated with it. They didn't build barriers. They built filters. They turned mud into high-performance insulation. They turned the invisible movement of air into a masterclass of fluid dynamics. They shaped entire cities around the complex science of shadow. Or their solution began with the very earth beneath their feet. The black silt of the Nile, deposited by the annual flood. A perfect cocktail of minerals, clay and sand, mixed with river water, chopped straw and organic fibers. The straw didn't just add strength, it created tiny air pockets, micro-insulation, within the brick. These microscopic voids acted as a barrier to heat transfer, slowing down the energy from the sun. They pressed the mixture into wooden molds, tens of thousands of them, left to bake until stone hard beneath the same sun it was meant to defy. The sun was the kiln. The sun was the source of the very strength used to block it. What seems primitive was actually a marvel of thermodynamics. Mudbrick has incredible thermal mass. In the language of physics, it creates a thermal lag. During the day, these thick, dense walls act as a solar battery. They soak up the fire of the afternoon, keeping it trapped within the material. The heat travels through the brick at a crawl, just a few millimeters per hour. It is a race against time that the wall always wins. By the time the thermal wave reaches the interior, the sun is already setting. The battle of the day has been won by the density of the earth. The wall absorbs the energy, so your body doesn't have to. At night, when the desert air suddenly drops and the stars turn cold, the walls begin to breathe. They release that stored warmth back into the night air, not into the rooms. They balance the world. The house becomes a thermal lung, inhaling the heat of the day and exhaling it into the night. A wall half a meter thick doesn't just block sunlight. It stabilizes time itself. It ensures that the peak of the external heat never meets the occupants inside. Inside, the temperature curve is a smooth, gentle wave, while outside it is a jagged spike, a constant biological rhythm protected by the mud. Egyptian homes weren't thin, light structures. They were bunkers of earth, dense, compact, protected by the sheer weight of the Nile. In the modern world, we use glass and thin walls that fail instantly without power. In Egypt, the wall was the power. From the outside, they looked humble. Flat roofs, minimal openings, stark, narrow facades. But every detail was a silent technician. Windows were tiny and positioned high, near the ceiling. Just enough to let light bounce off the whitewashed interior, but too small for the sun to pour through. They were eyes that looked away from the direct glare, yet they let the hot air escape where it gathered at the top, never letting it settle. A single beam of light reflecting off a white-plastered wall was enough to illuminate a room without heating it. Walls were coated in white limestone plaster, a radiant barrier, turning the house into a mirror that reflected the sun's rays back into the atmosphere. The building didn't just resist heat, it rejected it. A white city shimmering in the light, fighting the sun with its own brightness. And the streets, they weren't wide, exposed boulevards. They were narrow, winding canyons of mud brick, deep enough so that the buildings shaded each other throughout the day. The city was a labyrinth of intentional shadows. Most of the street level never saw the direct sun for more than a few minutes. But the very air in the street was cooler than the air above the roofs. The neighborhood was a single, massive thermal block. Less surface area exposed to the sun meant less heat absorbed. The city was a shield, a collective defense against the sky. Shared walls weren't just about space. They were about shared thermal protection. When houses are clustered together, they protect each other's flanks from Ra's fire. The courtyard was the heart of the innovation. At the center of the home sat an open void, a shaded internal lung, a vacuum for the wind. Physics was their chief architect. Heat moves upward. The Egyptians understood this instinctively. As the sun heated the roof, the warm air inside flowed out through high vents. This created a low-pressure zone at the floor level. But cooler air was sucked inward from the shaded alleys and the lush gardens. It was the stack effect, thousands of years before the term was coined. Even the kitchens were an exercise in thermal logic. Cooking fires were kept in separate outdoor areas or on the far corners of the roof. They knew that an internal flame was an enemy in 45-degree heat. They externalized the heat so the core of the home could remain a sanctuary. The kitchen was a satellite, isolated from the living quarters. Wealthier homes took it even further. The Malkaf, a Windcatcher, a high roof vent with a massive angled scoop reaching up like a sail. It was designed to catch the prevailing winds, The cool northern breeze from the sea, the Meltemi, the breath of the gods. It didn't matter if the air at street level felt still. The temperature difference between the hot roof and the shaded courtyard created its own wind. The Malkaf funneled this air downward, often forcing it over jars of water or wet charcoal mats. It transformed a dry breeze into a humid, cooling stream. It was a compressorless air conditioner, driven by gravity and pressure, not mechanical systems, architectural ones. The house was a machine that ran on physics, not fuel. It used the sun's own energy, the very thing it was fighting, to create the wind that defeated it. A beautiful irony of engineering. At night, the architecture changed its function once more. The flat rooftops became the primary living spaces. Families moved upward to sleep under the open canopy of the Sahara sky, where the desert air cools rapidly after the fire of the day is gone. The roof was the summer bedroom, cooled by the infinite void of space through radiative cooling. The stars were their ceiling. The cool breeze was their blanket. Desert climates are defined by extremes, scorching by day, chilling by night. Egyptian architecture didn't ignore this rhythm. It embraced it. The house was a rhythmic instrument, tuned to the frequency of the sun. The house wasn't a box sealed against nature. It was a filter. It breathed with the desert. It pulsed with the cycle of the Nile. Even the orientation was sacred. Buildings were aligned to face the north, inviting the cool breath of the Mediterranean. Western walls, where the afternoon sun is most lethal, were built even thicker. Double-layered, windowless, fortified against the dying fire of the day. Step inside from the blinding light of the street. Cross the threshold, and the world changes instantly. The temperature drops by 10-15 degrees. The air is still, soft. The glare is replaced by a cool, blue-ish dimness. The smell of dry mud and ancient dust. It wasn't magic. It was design. It was the mastery of materials. It was the result of 1,000 years of trial and error. Water played its part too. The proximity to the Nile wasn't just for transport or agriculture. It moderated the microclimate. Wealthy villas used salsabil, porous water jars and fountains. As water seeped through the clay and evaporated, it pulled heat from the air. A phase change cooling system powered by the dry desert wind. Every drop of water was a tool for thermal comfort. In some settlements, like the workers' village at Deir el-Medina, storage and sleeping areas were built partially underground, or tapping into the geothermal stability of the planet. A few feet down, the temperature never changes. The Earth remains a constant, cool 20 degrees, regardless of the 45-degree hell raging just a few feet above. The Earth was their heat sink. The physics never changed. Heat moves toward cold. Mass slows the shift. Shade prevents the gain. Airflow removes the buildup. The Egyptians didn't invent thermodynamics, but they mastered the art of living within its laws. They didn't see the environment as an enemy to be conquered, but as a partner to be understood. They didn't build against the desert. They built with it. And like the ancient turf houses of the north, these homes shaped the soul of the people. Thick walls meant shared walls. Shared walls meant communal security. Courtyards meant life was lived together in the center, as in the shade. Family life was centered around the coolest part of the house. The architecture encouraged proximity, not out of tradition, but out of thermal efficiency. Survival dictated the form of the city. The heat was the master weaver of their social fabric. The shade was where culture happened. Unlike modern cities where status is shown through glass and steel, materials that trap heat like a greenhouse. Egypt's materials were democratic. Mudbrick was the standard for the peasant and the prince alike. Even the interior of a pharaoh's palace was made of the same Nile mud. Status was shown in the scale and the decoration, not in the rejection of the material. Everyone, from the slave to the king, was protected by the earth. Only the temples and tombs were stone. Stone was for the gods and the dead, a symbolic choice for eternity. But stone is a terrible material for living in heat. It traps and holds energy like a furnace. It becomes a radiator of fire. Stone was for eternity, where the comfort of the body no longer mattered. Mudbrick was for the living. They lived in breathing houses of earth, knowing they would eventually sleep in silent houses of stone. Life in ancient Egypt required a constant, rhythmic awareness of the sun. Daily life wasn't a struggle against the environment. It was a dance with it, a choreography of movement between shade and light. Work began at the first light, before the hammer struck the horizon. The most productive hours were the coolest ones. Midday was for the deep, silent shade of the inner rooms, a collective siesta that allowed the body to recover. Evenings were for the rooftops and the rising moon. But the house wasn't just a shelter. It was a thermal sanctuary, a controlled interior world in a landscape that could kill the unprepared in hours. It was a masterclass in low-tech, high-intelligence design. And it worked. For 3,000 years. A design so perfect, it didn't need to change. Generation after generation, they lived in the same mud houses, cooled by the same northern wind. Long before compressors, toxic refrigerants, and failing electrical grids, entire civilizations thrived in climates that modern cities struggle to handle without a massive carbon footprint. We use incredible amounts of energy to fight the outside. We create heat to fight heat. They used incredible amounts of intelligence to live with it. The lesson wasn't about conquering the desert. It was about understanding the desert. But the Egyptians didn't try to overpower the heat. They redirected it, absorbed it, managed it. They made the heat work for its own defeat. They turned the sun's energy into a cooling engine. They built with mud, shadow, wind, and time. They understood that a building is not just a structure, but a relationship with the sky. And in doing so, they proved something we are only now starting to remember. Extreme environments don't demand extreme technology. They demand intelligent design. They demand a respect for the laws of the world. They demand we look at the ground beneath our feet. In the end, these homes were more than just walls and roofs. They were survival systems. Quiet, earth-colored, unassuming, blending into the sand from which they were born. They didn't scream for attention. They simply existed in harmony. But step inside, or feel the air cool against your skin like a ghost. Listen to the silence of the thick walls. Notice how the light is soft and the shadows are deep. The temperature drops. The sun loses its power. The desert is defeated, even when the world outside is burning. This is the power of understanding. This is the legacy of the Nile, a civilization that didn't just build monuments to the dead, but homes for the living. Homes that could breathe, homes that could endure, homes that were as smart as the people who built them. And this is just one civilization. The human story is full of people who refuse to be driven away by the heat. Next, we go deeper into the sand. To the desert, people who lived where 50 degrees is normal, and the very ground is a furnace. The nomads of the Sahara. A silhouette of a camel train moving against a sunset marks our next journey.